Good afternoon on the East Coast, good morning on the West Coast, and good evening in parts beyond. I'm Joel Hellman. I'm Dean of the School of Foreign Service, and I am very, very happy to welcome you all to another SFS Fast Break, our 30-minute program uh, sent out to all SFS alumni around the world. I'm very, very pleased to be able to welcome back to the SFS Fast Break for a command performance, Professor Marc Busch, the Karl Landegger Professor of International Business Diplomacy. We were here some time ago talking about tariffs and trade, and we're still here talking about tariffs and trade. Just for those of you who haven't been on one of these before, if you have questions, you can throw them in the Q&A function. I will try to integrate the questions into a chat, but try to keep the chat with one sort of dynamic throughout the entire conversation to keep this rolling through some key topics that we have to address today. I will try to get to as many of the questions as I can. But look, Marc, happy Liberation Day. Great to have you back. You warned us that we should expect some very, very significant actions on April 2nd, and we have sort of seen them. What surprised you about April 2nd?
I was surprised by the extent to which Trump got both the universal and the reciprocal tariffs all in one and wrapped it up in an executive order that left a lot of people guessing about how this was even remotely possible to arrive at this place and call it economically sound. The calculation surprised me. That's obviously received a lot of media attention, the way in which the reciprocal tariffs were calculated to begin with. They clearly were not pegged to anything other than a bilateral trade deficit. That was perhaps a little more outrageous than I would have guessed at the time. We all knew that there was no credible interest in tabulating tariffs and non-tariff equivalents in some kind of aggregate measure that he would then call the reciprocal U.S. tariff. But to completely conflate any protectionist measures abroad with some intuition behind a bilateral trade deficit definitely took me, like many others, by surprise.
Well, I really want to start trying to get a better understanding of the logic from the people around Trump who may be advising on this. Peter Navarro, as we know, is probably the person who has the most influence. We know Trump has liked tariffs for 40 years, 50 years more. So we know his personal affinity towards tariffs. But tell us if there is an intellectual case that those who are advising Trump, what is the logic behind the tariffs and how he has approached these tariffs?
There are a couple of themes that he's sold on the campaign trail, but the one that really sticks to his record going back, as you say, several decades, is this notion of tariff skipping foreign direct investment. Build the high tariff wall and force foreign companies to come to the U.S. to get in under that formidable barrier. And as he keeps repeating, come to the U.S. and there's no tariff. It's like saying don't earn any income and there's no tax. The reality, though, is that part of what's happened since he assumed office is that he's given us different and often conflicting motivations. There's the tariff revenue story. And remember, during the campaign, he floated the idea that there might be so much tariff revenue that he could replace some or all income taxes with the new haul. As we're seeing, especially today, given that the administration is deliberating on export credits as well as bailouts for farmers yet again, that's probably not going to come close to happening. However, the timing politically is interesting because as he pushes the Republicans to get tax cuts, this may not need to survive a lot of scrutiny or reality for all that much longer, so long as there is this hint that maybe there's offsetting revenue gain to allow the cuts to go forward. The one that we've all been hoping for, though, is door number 3. These are merely negotiating tactics. That, in fact, it's all one big effort to get foreign countries to do something. The something, though, is the mystery here. Is it to lower their barriers, or is it to get them to get around or lower, if not eliminate, their surplus with the United States? So think about what we've seen in the last 24 hours. Israel said, we will not only lower our protectionism, we will eliminate our surplus with the United States. Vietnam sounds interested in offering exactly the same deal. And part of the reality, though, is that those two things have nothing to do with each other. You could wipe out all the protectionism and you still wouldn't have a big dent potentially in the bilateral trade surplus that these countries have with the United States. This would be an academic oddity were it not for the fact that it's actually written into the executive order, which, by the way, has an escalation mechanism that is premised on bilateral trade deficits, not the tariffs and non-tariff barriers of foreign countries. So here's the big mystery that perhaps the audience hasn't really heard of yet in the media. Offer what? When these countries come knocking at the White House, offer what? Is it, we promise, like Europe said last night, 0 for 0 on industrial tariffs? Well, you heard the pushback. No, we want some compensation for the non-tariffs. That's a really good line. But even that won't be enough, because what the administration seems to ultimately fall back on is, we want the bilateral trade deficit gone. Now, here's the sleight of hand. The calculations for the bilateral trade deficit are goods only. You add in U.S. services, and we flip some of those deficits into surplus, or we at least completely undermine them. So take a look at Canada, which has a surplus with with the United States. But as soon as you add services in, it's a very different story. In fact, the story ends up with Canada, you'd be hard-pressed to hit them with the universal 10%. So all this by way of saying, this isn't mere academic curiosity. It's also the talk of the town on LinkedIn. These calculations, for however economically absurd they are going to ultimately undermine the negotiating angle, which is what Wall Street wants to see before it begins to bounce back.
Well, look, you lay out really three different logics, as I see it, to the trade tariff story, right? If it's a revenue, and I want to link the scenarios of what will happen from now on to the different logics that might have motivated this trade tariff story. You've got the revenue story. The reason why I'm doing this, I need to raise revenue. If I raise revenue, I reduce taxes. So it's really about revenue. In the end of the day, I just want to raise more revenue. Secondly, it's negotiation. I want deals. The way I do deals is gonna get the strongest tariffs. I've already done that. I've shown my willingness to do that. So now I'm going to get good deals. Everyone's going to come to me and I'm going to negotiate deals. And presumably those deals, as you said, are going to be about let's lower everybody's tariff barriers so we have a much more open trade regime. The third issue that you raise is it's not really only about those tariffs at all, but it's about, I want to strike deals to reduce trade imbalances and get you to buy or barter more stuff with the US. How do each one of those logics play out in the next few months? Like, what will tell you whether or not it's the revenue story, the negotiating story, or the trade and barter and imbalances story that is driving the Trump administration on this?
We'll get a pretty good clue in the very near term, because it will be the reaction to the EU 0 for 0 deal that will reveal which of these motivations ultimately is carrying the day. The problem with the revenue story is that as Trump is escalating with China, for example, you end up with a big number on no trade. So you're going to undermine the revenue story. The barter outcome is antithetical to anything that we have known in global trade for millennia. It's really not how it's supposed to be done, and it would demonstrate a remarkable retreat by the US from having any sense that markets versus politics are the way to determine transactions across borders and potentially within. So we're really hard pressed to figure out these contrasting, competing, conflicting motivations, but we will get some clarity with the US response to the EU. I'm not optimistic because I don't like what I heard in response to Vietnam's offer. And while I am very sympathetic to the concern about non-tariff barriers, don't get me wrong, the Trump administration is right to complain about non-tariffs in the EU, in Vietnam, in Korea, etc. But tariffs aren't the way to get that to change. They're much more subtle. That's why they're so popular, especially among rich countries. And we need some starting point without crushing our own economy and driving ourselves into recession. And there's got to be ultimately a better way to try and begin to open up markets for real. But if the deficit on a bilateral basis is really where all this is heading, we're in serious trouble, because then it is the GOP's rejection of economic theory, not just a small hiccup in terms of U.S. isolationism. This would be terrifying for our foreign trade partners. And I fear that as soon as there is a rejection, if that were to happen, of the EU zero for zero, you're going to see a lot of countries walking away from the bargaining table.
Well, a question has come up, and it's actually inherent in a couple of the questions that have come up. What's a better strategy to deal with trade imbalances? As someone said earlier in the questions that I saw, there is a problem of trade imbalances, or at least there appears to be a problem, certainly from the minds of the Trump administration. Warren Buffett and others have sort of talked about persistent trade deficits as a particular problem. What would be a better approach to handle?
Well, the premise is wrong. We don't think bilateral because it's a global economy, and there are 180 countries with which we have some trade. And to do this on a bilateral basis without looking at the big picture is to miss the entirety of the question, which really should be asked, namely, what is our comparative advantage? And to limit this for reasons political, not economic, to goods only, is to deny what 85% of American workers do, namely a service. So rather than try and recreate the 1950s, let's do what we do best. It feeds into the national security concern with respect to AI and everything else that sounds like it comes with big data. And we go on the offense. And here's the sticking point. Instead of fighting prehistoric tariff issues, let's open up markets to more trade and services. If the Trump administration wanted an off-ramp, here it is. The WTO failed us on trade and services, didn't open up nearly enough services to cross-border transactions. So let's get the job done right. Ironically, Trump started in 2019 to do exactly that. He brought the U.S. into the WTO's discussion on services of a digital variety. That's where our future is. Let's be clear on what the reasoning is behind these bilateral goods deficits as the only preoccupation. The Trump administration wants to go back to the stage in U.S. history where someone could graduate from high school and take a job on an auto shop floor and do labor-intensive work building a car. That hasn't been true for 40 years. And we should stop pretending that a McKinley logic from 1890 is going to get us back to the 1950s. Anyone who's been to an auto manufacturer has seen the amount of knowledge that any given worker has to have with respect to CAD/CAM, CASE, and K. It's prohibitive. And we should stop pretending that it's the 1950s.
So look, I want to now switch over to the response, right? The response of other countries. Obviously, some of the talk has been other countries to work around the United States to create their own free trade deals and to isolate the U.S. Others obviously talked about retaliatory attacks. What do you see as the likely response, especially from our key trading partners, our most significant trading partners?
So I'm going to add one factor to the response by the Trump administration to the EU zero for zero, and that is some leak today or tomorrow, because Jameson Greer, USTR, is on the Hill today before Senate Finance, tomorrow before House Ways and Means. I have no doubt that one of the questions he's going to get is, what do you want from a renewed USMCA? The answer to that question will largely determine whether we get a long line of 50 to 70 countries looking to cut deals or no one. if we get some indication that the metric will be, do you lower your tariffs or your non-tariffs, not the trade deficit, but tariffs and non-tariffs, then I think it's going to be a long line. And that would allow Trump to declare that he's done more to open foreign markets than any other president ever, which is not a bad off-ramp compared to door number 2, which is that he's overseen the largest tax hike since 1965 and the largest 3-day loss in the market since COVID. I'd take the other door. The other 2 options are this gets dealt with in the Congress or in the courts. It's really the only options we've got. Congress is beginning to issue bills to rein in these executive orders. And the Republicans have an incentive to do that because the fear is that when a new Democratic president is elected, they'll do the same nonsense in pursuit of climate change technology, raise tariffs to get that job done as well. So there is actually an incentive for the Republicans to be looking past the current administration and to realize these International Emergency Economic Powers Act tariffs need some reporting requirement, like Section 232 national security, like Section 301 as an enforcement action. That's what Congress has been doing. I have no doubt that Congress will continue to think up new ways to rein in these executive orders. The last option is the courts. Last week, we got our first domestic case filed in Florida. It's being championed by a libertarian NGO that is going to sue the Trump administration over the China tariffs, which are also under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. That's an interesting case. Small Florida shop, stationery is its main line of business, and its argument is that the China tariffs have deprived it of its ability to earn income. What the lawyers are arguing, I spoke to them on Friday, is that IEPA, this legislation, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, does not extend to tariffs. It is about sanctioning oligarchs, sanctioning financial institutions, and there's a very fine means-ends connection with respect to the emergency that is declared. And their point is that's not in evidence here. But you also have to understand where this legal team wants to end up is before the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court will do with this is it will look at these tariffs as being fundamentally disproportionate to anything ever envisioned under IEPA. You are talking about an enormous tax increase on everything. And that will raise the major questions doctrine that the Supreme Court is sticking to with respect to problematizing things that look like this or Biden's education giveaway. So one way or another, there's going to be a check. The question is, can Trump capitalize on whatever good could be eked out of this before those checks actually take hold? That's going to be the big mystery here.
Well, I'm gonna want to press you further on the Congress and the courts, but before I do, I actually want to get a better understanding of what the next couple of months could look like. Trump has already said he's gotten phone calls, delegations are coming, and they're all going to become offering something, presumably offering to lower their tariffs. And Trump is probably going to ask them further, besides lowering your tariffs, I also want I want to cut deals. I want you to buy soybeans. I want you to invest in our, one can imagine lots of different things that he is going to ask for. Tell us what you're going to be looking for in the country's offers to the U.S. And in Trump's response. And could there be, could he declare victory in sort of 60 to 90 days and sort of said, hey, look at all the deals I just made. These deals are, they look fabulous, at least on paper. They show a lot of commitments to reducing tariffs. They show a lot of commitments to buying U.S. goods. There is the time question, as we saw in Trump 1, that you can make those commitments. The question is, will they really be met over time? But tell us what that 60, 90-day period of negotiation is going to look like.
He's going to have to figure out a fast track approach to getting these deals done. If it's 50 to 70 countries, and if he approaches it the way he's approaching Japan, which is first in the queue, he's sending Ambassador Greer as well as Secretary Bessent to figure out that deal. If that takes a long time, then these other countries are going to be in the queue potentially for too long for their own politics. Remember, the EU 0 for 0, they made clear last night, this deal has an expiration date. They're not waiting for long. That is the reality to declaring a victory in the short term. He's going to have to do it quickly because the other calls that he's getting, aside from the ones from the 50 to 70 countries, are from executives, the CEOs, who are now beginning, as per the Wall Street Journal this morning, raising their voices. They are complaining. They are saying, we can't do this. They are saying this is a nuclear economic disaster. And the more of them that chime in, the more you're going to see the administration worry that they own this. There's no two ways about that. They own this, not Biden, and they're going to have to walk something back. What is so frustrating is that victory that you're talking about would be so close at hand, and it would allow him to tap a lot of the themes that he has been articulating. For example, he can say, I opened that, not the WTO. I opened that market. I opened a lot of markets. I opened a lot of markets in ways that we were never going to get traction had we done this the old-fashioned way. That would be a really big deal. He would carry ag, which is very worried about bearing the brunt of retaliatory strikes over this, and it will help U.S. tech. I want to make one comment about tech. For those of you out there who think that these foreign countries are retaliating like they did under Trump 1.0, you're dead wrong. If you actually look at the retaliation list, they are coming hunting for American intellectual property. This is a qualitative game change, and it should be viewed as such. And if you start risking American high tech and their IP assets, this is going to be an unmitigated disaster. So I would urge the Trump administration, take the win. It's big, it's calculable, and it's salient. It allows them to touch a lot of the themes raised during the campaign and to really offer a point of differentiation with respect to every prior administration. That's got to be enough because, again, door number 2 is horrific.
Well, tell me what the win looks like with China and what's the prospects. And we've already had a question about that. You talked about the negotiating strategy of countries coming here, how Trump is likely to respond to them. What do you think is the China response? And what do you think is a deal that could be struck between the U.S. and China that gets out of this?
I actually don't think this is too far afield. Trump has already hinted in his own words exactly what he wants from China. He wants what he didn't get under Trump 1.0. He wants U.S.-China phase 2.
What do you mean by that, U.S.-China phase 2?
So to get around some of the tariffs that he was threatening under his first administration, he struck a deal with China that was barter to its core. And China didn't live up to all the terms, and they never got around to doing phase 2. Phase 2 was going to be the dramatic phase. It was going to be, let's talk IP. Let's talk forced tech transfer. Let's do some of the stuff that really does drive the U.S. economy. I would imagine that if he could get some indication from China soon that phase 2 is on the table, he would be very motivated to take the deal. As he has heard this morning, according to the Wall Street Journal, there are already jokes from a lot of CEOs that they look forward to buying their $2,500 iPhone. That, of course, being rather cynical, but we're not too far afield. And so I would imagine, for the sake of the midterm elections in particular, take the deal. You wrote it. You thought it was good enough under 1.0. Phase 2 under 2.0, that would be a tremendous win too.
Well, look, let's talk a little bit about the congressional response and the court response. You gave us some indications of it. Is there a significant possible response, even jointly across the aisle, in which Congress could really put a dent in the Trump negotiating strategy?
So for the IEEPA tariffs, there would have to be a veto-proof joint resolution, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. However, both sides have seen what happens when an executive order is abused. There's no other way to describe this application, the reciprocal tariffs, as other than an abuse. Legally speaking, politically as well. I would imagine you're going to start seeing a lot more bipartisan support. The fissures within the Republican Party are already export-oriented versus import competing. You've got the ag community all up in arms over this one. I would imagine you're going to see bipartisan support. The question is, for what? If they word the bills cleverly and they limit and they have reporting requirements, they might be able to give the president that 90-day pause to deliver on something of value and not humiliate by pulling the rug from under his feet. So there are ways to do this. The bill that's getting all the attention right now doesn't declare this to be null and void. It says we need a reporting mechanism and we need the ability to rein this in if Congress is so inclined. That is the Constitution coming to life. There's nothing aggressive about that. And if it doesn't happen, I would imagine you're going to see subsequent rewrites to get the job done, because Congress has a lot to lose here. I mean, the reality is that on trade, they've done nothing, and their silence won't be tolerated, and everyone is expecting a bloodbath if we are in a recession during the midterms.
And then, look, play out the court scenario. If the courts do take actions that counter some of the efforts of the administration, what would that look like?
Then the tariffs are gone.
Gone completely? I mean,
gone completely.
How do you think the administration will react? Is it just it says we lost and we're finished and they will retreat? I don't really see that as a kind of move that this administration is comfortable with.
Well, you can imagine it as it happens, hopefully, after Trump has already gone for the win. So it's almost an afterthought. But if it happens before Trump does anything, it's going to be hard to resist the bipartisan support for repealing and to take out the National Emergencies Act requirement of having an emergency and then this being the necessary answer to said emergency. I don't know what options, without looking completely lawless, the president's administration will have.
Well, look, I want to end on a note of that I've seen in a number of questions. We've got CEOs on the call, we've got lawyers on the call, we've got business people on the call who are navigating this tariff landscape and navigating the incredible uncertainty about what's driving the next stages of these tariff negotiations and discussions. What do?
Call those you put into office and tell them your concerns. There's really, look, the accounting firms are getting really clever. The trade logistics people are getting really clever. Everyone's coming up with new methodologies to lower the impact of the tariffs by trying to differentially price, differently incentivize contracts, split the cost. There's a lot of creativity. Law firms are only too happy to take your dollars to get you in on seminars to show you some of these schemes. But the big constraint is exactly the term you started with, uncertainty. You have to understand this is on an order of magnitude. We've never seen something like this in terms of trade policy uncertainty. No one is benefiting from this. If this was meant to get us to the negotiating table, the window has to be closed because nobody is doing deals right now. No one is investing right now. And the layoffs are already starting in Michigan and in Ohio. The political backlash is getting out there on industrial levels that run against the narrative that Trump has been peddling for a while now, especially with respect to autos. We're also isolating ourselves. And that's the biggest concern. I worry the damage has already been done. I get the number, which by the way is unverified. 50 to 70 countries looking to do deals. My fear though, is that the damage has been done. You heard the Canadians say, we're never going back to how it was. That's our closest trade partner. I worry we can't unwind the uncertainty that we've created and the lack of credibility we will have in signing any future deal going forward. And ultimately, that's going to be the constraint with respect to deal making with these 50 to 70. Who's going to listen? Who's going to trust? And it'll be for our students to figure out a better world. And you know what the irony is? They're going to reinvent 1947. That's where they're going to end up. They're going to reinvent the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade and start again on one dimension in particular, bound tariff rates. Lessen the uncertainty.
Last word. Explain that a little bit more, because I think that not everyone in the audience understands what it means to go back to 1947. And then we'll end.
23 countries gathered in Havana, Cuba in 1947, and they made one really credible gesture. They tried to bind as many of their tariffs as possible, meaning they imposed a legal limit on how high the tariffs could go. That's what we need today. You see, the problem is Trump has us all debating 10, 25, 50. We're fixated on the numbers. The real problem is the uncertainty. The number could go to infinity. You have an executive order in hand. Why are we stopping at 50? Why not stop at 100, 200? So that little deal in Havana, Cuba, among 23 countries was profound. They all said, we get it. Tariffs do the revenue thing, especially in the developing world. Tariffs do the protection thing. That's key for democracies in particular. But you're going to have a legal limit. And if you violate that, you're going to have to answer for it. And that has been the single most important feature of the multilateral rules-based system that the U.S. has just exploded. And that is going to be hard to come back from.
Well, we have to end on that note. I hope everyone sees the passion we have for trade here at the School of Foreign Service, how important it is. We started 105 years ago or more as a school really dedicated to understanding trade in the New World Order after World War I. And it is ironic that 105 years or so later, we are back with this absolutely existential question about what America's approach to trade is going to be, how the world order of trade is going to be redistributed, reevaluated, rethought, and challenged. Couldn't have a better guide through all this than Marc Busch. We'll probably have you on again as we kind of look for the next stages of this. But let me thank the many, many of you who've joined us, who gave questions, and thank you, SFS audience, for being part of our community, for engaging with us. And we hope to see you again at another one of our fast breaks, which keep coming fast and furious in this administration. Thank you very much, Marc. Thanks all of you.